This conference will now be recorded.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so I'll just turn off the slides just for a moment so you can see my face. Good afternoon and welcome, and thanks for taking the time to join us this Wednesday. This webinar, as Jeff said, is part of the Squash Canada Coach Professional Development webinar series. And as we go through the presentation, please feel free to ask questions. Unfortunately, I can't see the chat box. I haven't fully figured it out to see the chat box as I present. But Jeff will be monitoring any questions that you type in there, and I'll pause briefly after each slide for questions through him, or you're welcome to turn on your mic and ask. We'll also have time for questions and discussion at the end of the presentation. All right, let's get into it. So, this webinar is about becoming a national team athlete. My disclaimer is that although I've thought about this from different angles and added some pathways that I did not take, my path certainly isn't the only one and the only way to get to the national team. Here are some major points about my squash just for background. I recently retired. I played many times for Canada over the years and played professionally on the World Tour for over 10 years. There's some pictures just for a visual. And so together we are going to peruse through the things that I've learned in a relatively chronological order. And I've considered each topic as I think it would interest a coach working with a junior or high performance or professional player. All right, getting into the nuts and bolts, let's start at junior experiences. So when you start sports as a kid, it's got to be fun. Things can be fun for different reasons for different people. When I was a kid, I liked that I got to play with my family and friends. I liked that I had my parents' full attention. I liked running around the clubhouse. Fun is very important, and that doesn't go away. It just looks different for people as they change and grow. Also important for young players is to present them with role models. You can't determine who will have the biggest impression on your athletes or your kids. So the more people and the better variety of people and perspectives that they can meet or spend time around or watch on a screen, the more likely they will come across someone who inspires them. Presenting goals for kids to work towards can make going to practice or other types of training interesting. For example, an upcoming Grand Prix tournament or a gold tournament, or getting to play with someone better than you if you try really hard for the next couple of weeks. As a coach, it's also important to appreciate your players' efforts and make it clear that you always expect the best from them. This will help set the tone that you expect effort as a baseline. Provide a fun, engaging environment for your juniors and your senior athletes that promotes hard work. Next, here's a breakdown of the path through junior squash that I followed. As I said, there are many ways to do this, and the junior pathway may look different these days with different events, or no events as it currently stands. So my pathway went from, as a small kid, about 8 or 9 years old, I played bronze events, then graduated up to gold events. I played City League, which gives you access to many different styles of players. And then I went on to play provincials and junior nationals. I made the Ottawa regional team to go and compete at Ontario team tournaments and the Ontario Games. I then started to get into provincial senior events and lost a lot, but it was an important transition for me to start to play seniors. I then went into international junior events, starting with the Canadian and US Junior Opens, and then moving into the Scottish and British Junior Opens, and got to compete at the Canada Winter Games. I started to get involved in senior nationals from there, and played some small PSA tournaments when I was about 15 and onwards. Got invited to squad camps for World Junior Championships and Pan Am Junior Championships, and then I got to compete in those 2 events. So that's kind of the path through juniors for me. Any questions about that so far? All right, all good. Okay, so getting involved at a senior level is refreshing after coming through juniors. If it's at all possible for your players to do this, I highly recommend it. It gives a fresh perspective on the sport, since many juniors end up playing the same people repetitively throughout their junior career. I found getting into senior events such as provincials, nationals, and PSAs, and Canadian team events to be extremely motivating and renewed my love for the game during a somewhat stressful junior experience, which many of you can probably relate to or see in your players. As your player looks to get involved at a senior level, it's a good idea for them to have someone who can show them the ropes or answer questions that they may have. This could be in the form of a formal or informal mentor, or a player that has stayed with their family as a billet for a tournament. I had a few role models in different capacities. My coach Heather Wallace was my role model. My sister was my role model. Runa Reda is from Ottawa, and she was my role model. I got to meet some amazing players when they stayed with my family for a local Ottawa PSA. And Mel Jans, who I think is on the call today, was a national team player who I connected with through a formal mentorship program with PSA when I was a teenager. In order to get training opportunities with senior athletes, you have to have your junior play events at that level. This will show their intention to compete and will give the player the opportunity to interact with senior players. This may open doors, since senior athletes may be looking for motivated training partners, and Squash Canada staff are always paying attention to effort and intention. That's a tongue twister. And of course, Squash Canada is also paying attention to results in events like that. So as your player goes from junior to senior, if they haven't already, they're probably going to lose. Losing doesn't feel great. And even now, as I find myself further from my intense playing days, I'm forgetting a little bit about how much losing hurt. So as a coach, it's important to try to put yourself in your player's shoes when they lose. After you do that, try to help them gain something from the experience. To gain from losing, after the match or tournament, ask your player to repeat to you their end goal with squash. Making a productive change to match strategy or training focus based on this performance and loss will help them get to their goal. Help them zoom out and see the big picture if possible. Some players may need a few hours or days before you approach them about this constructive feedback. So juniors get a lot of advice from different locations, and it's not just juniors. You're going to get advice throughout your career. Squash is a small sport, and a lot of people try to help each other out, which is awesome. Often the things that your player hears are similar to what you've already told them. My tip to coaches here is that different words and explanations resonate with different people in different contexts. Move forwards with your phrasing, with the phrasing that gets the point across to your player that they seem to understand the best. Now, what if someone else is telling your player something different or opposite to what you teach them? Together with your athlete, analyze the advice. Is it useful? And does it tell you something that you might not have noticed together? What is the message behind the words that the person giving the advice is trying to portray? My other thought on this front is that wherever possible, do not take these things personally as a player or as a coach. Be professional and constructive with advice and feedback that you hear. So as a player progresses through their squash career, if they're lucky, they will encounter a variety of training partners with different styles. If you see your player is playing people with similar styles, then encourage them to seek additional players with different styles of play to train with or compete against. My coach, Jess DeMora, was constantly pushing me to set practice matches with people I didn't want to play. This pushes your player out of their comfort zone, which is more likely to simulate the feelings and situations that they'll encounter in tournaments. It's good practice. So next, training stints. Training stints are periods of time you spend in other places to practice with different people and different coaches. It's a great way to reset, get a change of scenery, get different perspectives, see how others train, and train with new people. On occasion, it can get monotonous training at home. Going on a training stint never failed to get me excited about squash and really spice things up. In season is a great time to tack on short training stints to tournaments. Get match practice with different people if you go to a tournament early or you stay after the tournament. Or if there are a lot of tournaments in a row that are far away from home, stay somewhere in between to get that change up and experience. Summer off-season offers a chance for longer stints away. Decide if the player's priority over the summer is nailing down technical work at home, or if they could benefit from a larger pool of people to train with in a different city, or perhaps the perspective of a different coach to bring home to you. Make sure that if your player goes elsewhere for training, that you have a sit down on their return to review things that they learned. It might be wise to have them take journal notes in order to remember everything they learn. As a side note, at a certain level, some countries or academies pay players to train with their team. So you can tell your player to keep an eye out for this kind of opportunity. So squash is played over the entire country and the globe. So chances are your player will be driving or flying long distances at some point. Traveling for sport is not relaxing like traveling for fun. But I always made an effort to see at least one interesting thing or historic place wherever I went. Traveling can take a lot out of a player, so it's important to pay attention to how their body adapts each time they fly or drive long distances. Everyone's different. My advice is arriving at least 2 sleeps early to nearby sea level places. This takes the stress out of travel complications and gives the player a few hits to get used to the courts and conditions and facility. The farther you travel and the bigger the difference in conditions such as heat, humidity, and altitude, the sooner the player should arrive to adjust. Another thing that I learned over time was that it was nice to have someone in my corner at tournaments. Earlier in my career, these people were my teammates and friends who helped me during matches or helped distract me if I was nervous. As my career and life progressed and I worked at getting more and more competitive, I really appreciated having my family at events. My mom traveled with me to tournaments in the last couple of years. In between training and matches, I had company that I could just be myself with. I don't think we did quite as much sightseeing as she would have liked, but she survived. So squash is an individual sport, so it can feel lonely sometimes. Make sure you sit down with your player and, as a written exercise, help them map out their support system. This is the core group around the player who is cheering for them. The player can call them their team. For some, like myself, it's easier to play for your team, and it increases motivation on a day-to-day basis. Your player can use this concept in difficult moments in a match to push through for their team, or in really tough training sessions, or to get out of bed in the morning when they are sore and tired. One of my sports psychologists helped me a lot with this concept, and I found it especially powerful as a young adult. As I grew older, I found it easier to play and work hard just for myself. This could be completely different from person to person, and it can't hurt as a coach to provide the opportunity for this reflection for your players. So talking about PSA, getting into PSAs is hard. If you have a player who is interested in pursuing PSA one day, it is worthwhile, in my opinion, getting them involved casually before they pursue it full time. This will inform them if they're interested in continuing, and it will also help them slowly build up points so that when they do want to play professionally, they can actually get into tournaments. Some provincial senior events and some junior events offer PSA ranking points, so it's important to read up on this on the PSA website as part of your job as their coach. Junior players can play satellite events to get points, and they can get local spots or wildcard spots in PSA tournaments. Hosting a PSA event is a great way to ensure your player gets a local spot for the experience and points to get their career started. Have a read up on the point system for PSA and understand the power of the divisor. It took me too many years to notice that my good results were diluted if I wasn't paying enough attention to the amount of tournaments that I was playing compared to the number by which my points were being divided. If your player is keen for PSA matches but stuck on the reserve list due to a low ranking, have them sign up for anything and everything that they could possibly attend, realistically, even if you think the size of the event is out of their league. If one of these events has withdrawals and they get in, it can be a big leg up. I've seen this where very large events sometimes have low registration and people get in that didn't expect to get in. Waiting for the perfect tournaments that you can plan for and get into right away as soon as they want to start their career may not happen. I suggest you be flexible on this front. And finally, if you have questions, the PSA office can be emailed directly for general inquiries. Of course, they cannot help with strategic stuff like how best to manage the point system, since that would be unfair if they did that for some and not for others. So college squash, many players like Canadians Danielle Letourneau and Nick Sackvey went to study and compete in university before continuing on to play professionally. This is becoming more and more common, and you may have noticed that that a lot of the top male and female PSA players are US college graduates. Competition is high in US college squash, and I have no doubt that this is a very powerful journey on the way to becoming a national team athlete or a professional. Plus, the athlete will come away from college and start their professional squash journey with a degree and great networking contacts. Nice. So some information on playing for the senior national team. Playing on the national team is a great change up to the usual individual nature of our type of sport. Your player will learn how to play with a whole different type of pressure. And they will have access to another coach and their feedback after each event, as well as a therapist during events, which is a novelty in our small sport and also something you have to get used to because often we're not used to having a therapist at events. Debrief with your athlete whenever possible after events like these, since one can learn a lot from them. So checking in with your players weekly off court is valuable for both you and them. It provides a level of accountability as to their weekly output and a chance for acknowledgement of their effort. Having your players record and share weekly logs is a great way to track progress, increases in load, and improvements, as well as a lack of effort or a lack of progress. This is more relevant in their mid to late teens and onto professional levels as opposed to younger players. It can feel like a lot of extra work if it's complicated to input information and share logs with you. I suggest a casual weekly check-in via email or phone and a more formal sit-down check-in, goal evaluation, and training and tournament planning 2 to 4 times per year. This sit-down meeting is a good time to bring the support team for your player together to plan the player's schedule, coordinate training, and discuss and address any issues that have come up. Any questions, Jeff?
Nothing at the moment.
Cool. Okay, talking about training. So when planning training, analyze your player's strengths and weaknesses and decide what 1 or 2 important focuses will be to make the most long-term improvements. Network with knowledgeable professionals who can give you and your player more information about their body function or about the sport. Try new things and approach important but boring things in different ways to reduce the monotony of certain types of training. Keep an eye on the internet and other people's training at tournaments or in camps to see what their schedule looks like and any interesting training theories or ideas they have. Read books and articles and take courses as it's possible for you. So let's talk about funding. There are many different ways your player can fund their squash career as a junior and a senior. These include prize money, company sponsorships such as receiving and promoting equipment or products or being a brand ambassador, provincial funding, Sport Canada carding, and the many benefits it provides, such as the main one, which is allowance, monthly allowance. It also provides a sizable amount of tuition support that can be used for any Canadian education during their career or within 5 years of last receiving carding. Sport Canada carding also opens doors to other resources that I'll cover later. Other types of funding can come from personal supporters, clinics and exhibitions, coaching and running camps. So if you can help your player get certified, that's often very helpful. And also speaking engagements are opportunities to make some money or might be more of a volunteer thing. It depends on your style. And lastly, this isn't a funding stream, but a place to stay and maybe with reduced or no rent makes all of those other things go so much farther. So whether it's with your family or through an organization or maybe like a co-op house situation, anything that can help you reduce rent is very, very, very helpful. Are there any questions about funding? I know it's an important subject and it can be a barrier for a lot of people. So if you want to turn on your mic, you're welcome to ask any questions about that.
Hi, Sam.
Yeah.
You're covering topics very thoroughly, but I think I heard you say something about co-op couch surfing or something to that effect. What is that?
I don't know if I said it right, but co-op housing. So it would be something to look up. It's reduced costs for like your rent. So you could live in a place that has like a lower rent based on your income. There's multiple different streams, but I remember actually Mel talked to me about that when I first started playing pro. I ended up living with my family, but it's something to keep in mind, like different opportunities for people who, you know, have low income. They might be able to find places to stay. Does that make sense?
Yep. Okay. Thanks for clarifying.
Couch surfing is also a good option.
Hi, Sam. Just a quick question regarding sponsorship and your experience of gaining sponsorship. When you've joined as you started to get into the PSA, how did you find engaging with potential sponsors and your experience of developing relationships with them for that?
Good question. So from my experience, at the start of my career, I wasn't very good. I don't think if you looked into me as a player and like my brand at the time, I don't think you would have been like, yeah, this girl is going to go far and she has a lot to offer at the moment, because I wasn't ranked that high. I wasn't on the national team yet. So what ended up happening for me was I did a lot of cold calling and I made kind of a booklet to promote myself that I sent and showed to a lot of different companies that I thought would be helpful. Some were like, a faraway dream, like Air Canada. I tried to get in touch with, but it's hard to find someone. So what I would, what my experience was on this front was that most of the cold calls and like getting in touch with equipment people and clothing people and shoe companies at the beginning of my career didn't work. What worked for me was showing that information to people who already knew me. So for example, my first sponsor, like personal supporter, was someone from my club growing up who saw the effort that I was putting in and thought that I could do well, but he only knew that because he knew me well. So someone, if I'd approached someone that wasn't at the club who didn't see what I did every day, they might not get the full picture of how hard I'm trying and how much I want it. So my suggestion on that front is to prepare something that can explain your benefit. So it might be, visibility in terms of like PSA, TV coverage, live streaming situations in Canadian events. Maybe you can take their company out once a year for a company squash event. Consider what you can offer, put it into a document that you can share, and put it out to the people that are around you, that you're like in close proximity with, who see you training, who see you working hard. And a really good tip that I got on this front is first to ask people like that are close to you for advice about your funding proposal, because it will let them know that you are looking for funding and you need it. And then some people might step up and help you. Does that answer your question? Very long answer.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Brilliant. Thanks, Sam.
No problem. Okay. Any more questions on funding?
So we got another question here, Sam, in the chat from Nick. He is asking, how has the game evolved over the last decade or so? How can coaches be proactive in changes that are happening currently?
Okay. I can't believe I can answer that question, first of all, over the last decade. Okay, so I think the most proactive thing that you can do, because there have been changes in the way the game has been played. So something important to watch would be watching PSA matches to see how people are playing, how people are attacking, how precise things are, just to give you an idea of, if that's a route your player is going on, how much you have to zero in on those things. It will give you a good broad perspective of that. And also, I would recommend, sounds really simple and silly, but follow along some of the players that are of interest to you as a coach and also to your player. Follow them on social media. And you can skip through all of the pictures of them on the beach or whatever, but look for their training videos, look for their insights into their day-to-day, and check out such resources as like PSA's YouTube of a day in the life of. And I think that will give you a really good idea of how hard people are working, like whether it's more or less than you expect. It will help inspire your player as well, and it will inform you as a coach of the approach and how people space out their day as a professional or as someone who's trying to improve. So those are some kind of easy resources you can get. In terms of how things are evolving in general, I'm certainly not a professional on that front, but over the course of my career, I just kept trying new things. So that would be my recommendation, like on a more personal front, is try not to get stuck just approaching your training from one way. Keep trying to change it and give your player different ways to look at their training. And as for resources, if you're looking for like really current squash resources for training and competing, I would recommend getting in touch with Squash Canada, because they will have access to all the latest things that come out. So tell Jeff, especially Jeff and Jamie, tell them that you're interested in the latest coaching information and science, and they see that stuff that comes into them, so they can share it with you. Okay, does that answer that? Well, it's a text, so I don't know if you'll be able to get that answer fast, but hopefully that answers that question. Any more funding questions? Cool. All right. Okay, so moving forward, as a fun aside to the usual singles squash talk, can you tell I'm excited about doubles? Does anyone here try to incorporate doubles play into your advanced players training? Maybe your less advanced players, but probably safer for the slightly more advanced crew. If so, or if not, it's so fun, and it will give them valuable experience with softball doubles. Hardball is also relevant, but that softball doubles experience, even if it's on a singles court, is something that comes into play as a junior at the Pan American Junior Championships, and as a senior at the Pan Am Games and the Commonwealth Games, as well as any doubles World Championships opportunities. Medals at these types of events are often important for funding purposes, so being proficient at doubles is a powerful tool to have in your player's belt. Ensure you help your players learn that doubles tactics are quite the opposite to singles tactics, since you want to keep playing the ball at or for the person who you have under pressure, whereas in singles you hit the ball away from your opponent. For most people, injuries are going to happen at some point, and you hope they will be small for your athletes. Do your best together to minimize the risk through addressing weaknesses, through strengthening, and practicing proper form in the gym and on court as best you can. In the event of injuries, understand that some injuries may indicate a need for rest, while others can be worked around. There's often things that the player can do while injured, like video analysis that they otherwise wouldn't have had the time or patience for, or strengthening an unaffected part of their body. You can also benefit from injury time by spending more time with your friends or family, which sometimes is hard to come by when traveling constantly for squash. There can be good things in injuries, although you'll have to work with your player to help them see it. So there are many resources for players and coaches. I've listed some that I've used heavily here, and they include Athletes Can, My Game Plan, the Canadian Sport Institutes, Coach.ca, which you're all probably very familiar with, books and articles and interviews, and social media, as we kind of discussed. Have a poke around all of these organizations' websites. I would highly recommend it, and inform yourself as a coach about what they offer. Your athlete may need resources from all of these different places at different times in their playing journey, and you can point them towards these important resources. You'd be surprised how much stuff is on all of those websites. Does anyone have any questions about resources? Because I think this is very important. You're welcome to turn on your mic. Or has anyone not heard of one of these and want to know more about them? Okay.
Sam, maybe a question for you on the Canadian Sport Institutes. For those who might not know about it, have you had any experience dealing in your specific case, the Canadian Sport Institute Ontario, and taking advantage of their resources, both whether yourself or your various coaches, because obviously you've had multiple coaches in your career?
Yeah. So the Canadian Sport Institute of Ontario is in Scarborough, and there's sport institutes all across Canada, and they are big institutes that have a lot of resources, especially for carded athletes, but it's also worth looking into them even if you're not carded, just to understand what they have, and you can access it, I think, at a cost. So know what they have, because they have a lot of scientists, they have a lot of rehab stuff. So my personal experience with the Ontario Institute is I spent a lot of time there when I was injured, and they have all the coolest gadgets for rehab. So I spent time on a treadmill in a pool that was specific for rehab and exercise for injuries. I spent a lot of time on their anti-gravity treadmill so that my joints and injuries weren't as affected, but I could still get a really good workout. Physiotherapy, sports psychology, and then another thing that worked out of the Sport Institute that I attended a lot was career counseling. That is operated, so the game plan, so my game plan and the Canadian Sport Institutes kind of work in tandem. So my career counseling was a game plan initiative, and it ran out of the Sport Institute. So a lot of these things are very intertwined. As you get to know them better, or if you already do, you might have noticed that yourselves. What else is at the Sport Institutes? Testing, fitness testing, very, very useful. I believe you can purchase that. I think it's free if you are carded, but you can also purchase that resource if you want to pursue some fitness testing to set baselines and continually monitor your training improvements. There's a lot more stuff there. There's a whole gym at the Canadian Sport Institute Ontario, beautiful gym, accessible for everyone. A lot of sports train out of there, so it's an inspiring environment to be in, seeing everyone else working really hard, seeing other top athletes from other sports, and everyone all over Canada has access to one of those, so I would definitely recommend checking it out. Hopefully that answers that question. Thank you. Okay, next, just talk briefly about having other interests. So hobbies and other interests can help your players feel grounded and less uptight about their squash. It's a difficult balance to strike, since you also want to give them every chance to be as focused as possible. Low commitment hobbies, such as casual volunteering, musical instruments, creative art or dance, and gaming are some examples of things that players can get involved with that may give them a sense of identity outside of sport. I think this is important, especially if the athlete is ever faced with an injury, as we discussed. Hobbies and other interests can also help the athlete when faced with the transition away from highly competitive sport that dominates their identity. So now I thought I would give you a bit of a story time, just so that I can share with you some memorable moments that have affected my path as a player and person. And I hope you'll stick with me through them. So the first one was a serious talk that my mom had with me right after a PSA in Montreal. She had helped me register. You can read between the lines there that she registered me, and she drove me there from Ottawa. I was 17 or 18. I had played many PSA tournaments, and I thought I was doing everything right. I did my little warm-up, I played my match, and when I lost, she gave me a proper talking to. She was completely unimpressed with my lack of focus before my match, where I was chatting with my friends until the last moment, and I didn't seem to be giving 100% during the match. I hadn't prepared at all before getting to Montreal, and my mom explained to me the effort that she put in to help me get to this competitive event and the commitment that she was giving to me. If I wasn't going to show the same effort and commitment back to her, then this will not work. I was very upset, and I couldn't understand her frustration and her ultimatum until later. This is now the core of my work ethic in my life, to do whatever I'm doing at 100% effort. Oops, more. There's more. That's just the first one. The second was a chat from my coach, Heather, after a nationals final that I lost. I thought I played well that day and patted myself on the back and was ready to have some fun after a stressful weekend of nationals. Heather gave me a few minutes after the match and then came over telling me that I had a chance to go 2-1 up in the final. She didn't think that I realized how close I was to winning. She thought that if I'd realized it at the time, I may have come off court with the thought of, I was so close to possibly winning. I'm annoyed with myself, and I just want to get back on court and play that all over again. The delivery and timing of this chat were tough for me at the time, and I shed many a tear, but only to emerge stronger and, like my mom's hard talk, extremely appreciative of this push to be better and look for more from myself. Heather was trying to help me find a fire inside that took many years for me to properly pull up. Next was a report from Shauna Flack. She was the national coach at the time, after my first senior World Team Championships. In her report, Shauna described in detail how much fast food I ate while we were at the event. And it made me absolutely cringe and reevaluate how to approach my match prep and how to be a responsible fourth string player on a team that could need me at any moment. I struggled to accept her stern approach at first, and then I grew to really respect it. This report stuck with me and encouraged me to be professional throughout my career. And finally, when I was slowing down and coming to grips with the idea of retiring, my coach Jess had my back. She was extremely flexible. Typically, we had planned a lot together, from training to tournaments. Over the course of about a year, my goals were less clear, and I had shifted from a large amount of planning and preparation to barely any. She worked with me through that without pushing our previous approach on me, and she changed her style with me as I changed. I'm just so grateful for her for this, and it helps me consider what other people might need in different stages of their lives. So that's my story time. Now a couple tips from me to you. In my fresh hindsight, recently retired, I wish I'd watched more opponents' matches with a critical, objective eye, looking for strategy plays. I recently took a course on personal training, which included an in-depth look into bones, muscles, and joints. I wish I'd taken this course during my career, since I think it would have helped me understand injuries and strengthening needed for squash. I think I could have done more training stints to play matches with a wider variety of players. However, I understand that this option isn't always financially or logistically possible. I wish I'd done more solo practices. They would have increased my consistency and execution through shot repetition. And I wish I'd taken up a hobby sooner in my career, since I found injury time quite difficult to navigate. So your athletes at some point will transition out of high performance sport. They may completely leave the sport or stay highly involved or somewhere in between. I believe this can have a great effect not only on them, but on you. Provide your athletes as much support as possible during their transition and offer to help them get the resources they will need to be successful in whatever is next. Explain to them the possible ways to stay involved in squash and continue to feel connected to this awesome sport and the community that they are a part of. These connections will never go away. So these ways that you can stay involved are being on a board, helping out on a committee, playing events like local tournaments, provincial or national events, masters events, and doubles events. You can mentor juniors, you can become an official, you can be a coach, and you can help drive and implement policy or sport improvements. And of course, you can introduce our amazing sport to more people. That is it from me. Thank you so much for listening. Jamie Nichols asked me to remind you guys on behalf of Squash Canada that if you or one of your athletes has an eye on being on Team Canada, that you should reach out to him 100%. He's ready and willing to help you navigate everything as much as you need. I hope there's something helpful in this webinar for everyone. And if there are any more questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. And I'm always available via email. And Jeff has my contact information in the event that you don't have it. So thank you so much for listening. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, so we have a question in the chat here, Sam. What do you think of training, learning from other sports? So say football and soccer were the two examples in there, but you may find another sport that you would reference.
So what do I think of like training tactics from the other sport? Is that the question, or using other sports to train?
Let's start with tactics. It's a little bit generic, but let's start with tactics.
Yeah. So tactics. So one thing that's really important, I think, is that a lot of other sports have maybe more research than squash does. So I think it's a really good idea to keep an eye on other sports and research that they have coming out about, anything about anaerobic work, lactic acid, the most efficient way to raise your VO2 max. These kinds of things will be coming out in such things as football or soccer because there's a lot of work around those. So I would definitely recommend keeping an eye on other sports for those resources. In terms of using other sports to train, I'm all for that, especially for juniors, because squash can get pretty intense if it's the only thing you do. So I would definitely suggest, as a kid, and you're in elementary school, you're in high school, get some variety in terms of your sports. The less commitment you can have towards them and the more towards squash, I definitely think that is important. But it can definitely help your juniors kind of take a load off, because squash can get pretty intense if it's the only thing. As you go forward, though, you'll probably find, if a kid is pretty good at another sport, this is what I found anyway, as you're good at another sport but you want to pursue squash, there's just not enough time with high school and a competitive rec sport plus squash competitively. There just wasn't time for me, at least. So I stuck with school sports, which were, I don't know, in Ottawa, they were pretty low commitment. Maybe in Toronto or in other cities in Canada, they're higher commitment. I'm not sure. But I was able to get, team sports and other cross training through my high school sports and some fun. And then I took squash very seriously from the age of 14 on. So throughout my senior career, I dabbled in a couple sports, but to be honest, I was a bit worried about injury in other sports because I obviously didn't train that much for them. So I think that's just totally a personal thing. I wasn't willing to risk, a random injury from a soccer game for my squash career. So that's my perspective. But everyone would be totally different on that. Any more questions?
So we've had a question from Giselle Delgado here. I noticed some juniors aiming for college squash overdoing things. And she says, at least to me in my older body, and I can certainly relate to that too. As you get older, it's harder to compete at that high level. She says they're constantly trying to catch up to others who may have started younger. She said she never played as a junior. So do you think there can be too much squash to the point where, you can, overdo it, hurt yourself, and you're not going to be able to catch up?
Yeah, I'm thinking you're right. There's such a buzz and a drive and stress, and I think it definitely is kind of leaking into Canada. I saw it a lot, Giselle, when I was in the States, and I would stay with families who had kids that were really into squash, and the stress that they were under was it kind of gives me goosebumps to see it. So I think the more as a coach, the more you can offer a bit of perspective for your players, that they can only control the outcome of their squash career if it pertains to, going to college. They can only control it so much. And try to show them like explain to them the potential for burnout if they are going so hard. I think it's really important to address the concept of burnout and try to explain to them the different signs you can see, because I know that's a really tricky topic because it's so different for everyone. But if someone's, as you say, working so hard because everyone's working so hard and the drive is so high and everyone's so, horse blinders on squash, that can take a real stressful toll. So, I mean, it might be using another sport just to give them a little bit more perspective. Maybe instead of like a competitive rec sport, maybe it's like one of those casual leagues that they could take part in just to pull them away from squash just for a little bit. And like in regards to those repetitive injuries, one thing that I do notice and I think might be relevant just after taking this personal training course is explaining to your players the benefits of strengthening, which can help, if you have proper form and someone's guiding you through movements with weights, that can really help reduce the risk of injuries. And obviously on the same level, you can't go crazy with the weights and do the weights every day on the same muscles. But if you space it out properly and they can get in about 3 weight sessions a day, you can reduce the risk of those injuries that you mentioned. Hopefully that answers the question. Kind of went on.
Okay, another question from Mark here asked, what was your experience of transitioning between the PSA events as a solo player and then coming into team events? For example, the Canadian Women's and Men's Teams Championships is a mandatory requirement for PSA players. So he asks, in terms of engaging and interacting with teammates on and off the court to get the best out of performances, whether it's the teams events or competing as a team for Squash Canada?
Yeah, so, gosh, I feel like that's a really, really big question, but because there's so many ways I could take it. But I think first focusing on the good part of this is that, I love the individual aspect of squash, but I did find it very refreshing to play with a team and for a team. Just such a nice way to change up the competition. And I found that I did play better for a team. I played well for myself as well, but like I felt like after my initial experience that I kind of mentioned where I was a pretty poor 4th string player on a team, I think from then on, you could count on me to give I might not win, but I'm going to give my absolute best effort for the team. So I really liked that transition. In terms of tips for, it is a big kind of social adjustment playing for yourself to playing for a team. So some things that I would suggest would be some team building work. If you have the time and the resources to do it, you could probably do some stuff for free, especially these days. Like there's fun stuff online. COVID's opening up a whole other world of online access to like team building stuff. One piece of advice that really sticks out to me, and Mel Jans is on this call, so she can speak to this, but she gave us really good advice one time. We were at a team tournament and we had a really nice team, but sometimes a group of 4 people can be a real variety of personalities. And Mel's tip was, I think, one that she'd learned from a coach before her. If you are going to say anything about a team member, if you cannot say it to them to their face, then you can't talk about it with any of the other team members, because one of the things that I think happens with teams is, you get roomed, you have a group of 4 or more people, you get roomed with one other person, and if you talk about other teammates amongst yourselves, then I think it can create a weird dynamic and some weird social stuff. So Mel's advice was, if you can't say something straight to the player, which she encouraged, if you had an issue, talk straight to the person. And if you can't say it straight to the person, then you don't talk about it with anyone else. So that's my kind of, social suggestion in regards to individual to team sports adjustment.
And if I can just comment on that too, Sam, from a curling perspective, as my background is a team of four, for curling, we, as much as feasibly possible, travel together. We go to meals together, and you bond that way. Another way with COVID, Zoom calls. I know I constantly am on a monthly basis. My girls are not competing right now because they can't because of COVID, but we have monthly Zoom calls. So much like squash, if you know you've got a team event coming up, get together on Zoom. And even if it's just, shooting the breeze, you're not talking squash, but getting together and talking about something else, it does build team camaraderie. And I think that's a very important aspect that I'm sure, Sam, you can appreciate, the bonds that you've probably created with Mel and some of the other girls that you've met and competed with, has relayed into your performance on the court.
Yeah, definitely. 100%.
Any other questions for Sam? Last call for questions. We'll make this the last question then from Giselle. Do you have any suggestions with nutrition and squash?
Giselle, I don't know if I'm the best person to ask about that. Obviously from my first experience on that national team going forward, I was a lot better, but I certainly was no shining star for nutrition. I grew up quite skinny, so basically my parents were like, eat anything, and that's kind of the approach I've taken since then, just because my activity level has been so high. I always was kind of like, throughout my career, I was always nervous that I was undernourished or not eating enough, and the feeling of being hungry actually made me really uneasy because I felt I was working really hard throughout the days. So I think in terms of nutrition and squash, something to just keep in mind that I think is very important is protein intake. Making sure that your players are getting enough of that in order to support all the work that they're doing, tearing apart their muscles every day on court and in the gym. So there's a lot of, you'll probably be able to find, I can't remember the exact ratio right now, but there's like a ratio for athletes of, based on your body weight, how much protein you should be eating. And if you are anything like me, or your players are anything like I was, it's a lot more protein than you're probably eating. So I would recommend checking out that number and trying to help your athlete find a way to incorporate that. I think it might also help reduce any chances of injuries like you were asking about before. So helping them rebuild those muscles would be very important for nutrition. In terms of, just a quick overview of like tournament nutrition, everyone approaches it differently. My approach was to eat as much as I could of a combination of a protein and a carb and vegetables, and higher on the carbs, a bit of protein and not too many vegetables to upset my stomach. And I would eat that 3 to 4 hours before I played, and I would eat as much as I could. Basically, I would eat not until I was over full, but until I was like properly full 3 or 4 hours before. And that for me was my timing for my body to feel like my stomach was settled before I play my match. But everyone's so different about that. I know Sean Deliere doesn't eat at all before his matches all morning. I don't know if he still does that, but which was like a complete shock to me. But he just couldn't stomach food in his belly when he was nervous and competing. So everyone's approach is different, but that's my experience with nutrition. Can't hurt to also take a nutrition course just to know the very basics to help your athlete.
Great, thanks, Sam. Well, on behalf of Squash Canada, Sam, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I hope everybody that participated today got a little something out of it. There was a lot of great information, key little points. I learned lots myself, and I don't even play squash, so I find these sessions are very informative. Whether you're a squash player or not. So again, thank you everybody for attending. Just a friendly reminder that we have our next presentation in a couple of weeks. Pat Hartuni is going to be talking about the mental coach and how that applies to coaching and squash. And then we have another presentation early December on another great topic. And then into January, we'll have things like school squash, as well as how to market yourself on social media and much more. So please register for those upcoming webinars. And thank you again for participating today.
Yeah, thank you guys all for being here. That was really fun.